Welcome back to Chapter 9 of To Kill a Mockingbird. Today we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to give you an overview of the chapter, talk about some allusions, some characters, and some major themes. The chapter starts off with Scout fighting Cecil Jacobs. This is boy number 3 that she will fight. Cecil Jacob has called Atticus a nigger lover. We get into this backstory where Scout asking Atticus, why did Cecil say you defended niggers? Atticus says, I'm simply defending a Negro. His name's Tom Robinson. He's a member of Calpurnia's church, and Cal knows the family well. She says they're clean living folks. Scout, you aren't old enough to understand some things yet, but there's some high talk around town to the effect that I shouldn't do much about defending this man. So Atticus has been asked to defend Tom Robinson by John Taylor. Tom Robinson is an African American who has been accused of a crime. The town, for the most part, does not think that Atticus should defend Tom Robinson. So this has caused some problems. Cecil Jacob said that Atticus is a nigger lover because he's defending Tom Robinson. Of course, most of the kids don't really know what is meant by a nigger lover. This is one of the reasons why Scout asked what he means by that. It sounds like that. She says it sounds like Atticus is running a still, which is a bad thing to do. The kids are just reiterating what they've heard from their parents. They don't quite understand the problem. They're reiterating it from the parent, what they've heard from their parents. The parents think this is a bad thing to do. Note that this is one of the ways that racism is taught. Who is Tom Robinson? Well, we haven't got to find out who he is yet. Just that he's been accused of a crime. All right. Scout asks Atticus, "Are we going to win it?" "No, honey." "Then why?" "Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started is no reason for us to not try to win." So Atticus knows that they're going to lose this court case. He's hoping that they'll win in the Court of Appeals, but he knows that the trial in Macomb, they are going to lose. But that is no reason why not to try to win, particularly if it's your duty to defend someone. Even if you know you're going to lose, you defend that person, particularly if you believe that they are innocent. Scout says, "You sound like Cousin Ike Finch." Cousin Ike Finch is the sole surviving Confederate veteran in Macomb. So the Finches have members that fought on the Confederate side. Again, this is an allusion to the Confederate the Civil War. Cousin Ike wears a General Hood type beard. Note that this General Hood is another allusion. This reinforces this idea that Atticus just mentioned, that simply because we're going to lose doesn't mean that we don't try. Note that General Hood took control of the last Confederate forces after Robert E. Lee surrendered. Hood fought against impossible odds. The war was over. It was a lost cause, but like Atticus is a lost cause here. It was a lost cause, but General Hood continued to fight to the end. Note that General Hood also, during the Civil War, lost both an arm and a leg. But he fought, against for this idea that he believed in, which is kind of reinforces his idea that Atticus is fighting for this idea. So after this discussion about what Cecil Jacobs meant by nigger lovers, we get into Christmas. And every Christmas, Uncle Jack comes to stay with the Finch family, and they go out to the Finch Landing and hang out with Aunt Alexandra, Uncle Jimmy, and Alexandra's grandson Francis. I will go over the importance of Uncle Jack and Aunt Alexandra later. What we get here, Scott is beginning to cuss at this point. She's in a stage where she's trying out language. She doesn't quite know what the language means. Uncle Jack doesn't like this. Uncle Jack says, "I don't want to hear any words like that while I'm here, Scout. You'll get in trouble if you go around saying things like that." So Scout's using words like damn and hell and pass the damn ham. Uncle Jack does not like to hear. Uncle Jack actually has an important lesson here. You don't go around swearing unless you're really provoked. It will get you in trouble. And he wants Scout to grow up to be a good person, or a lady, as he says. And Scout does, of course, doesn't want to be a lady because ladies have a lot of terrible things about them, according to Scout. Because Aunt Alexander is a lady, and Scout and Aunt Alexander don't really get along very well. Scout says that Aunt Alexander is like one of the coldest people she knows. We then get Scout and Jim for Christmas receive air rifles. This is going to be important in the next chapter, very important next chapter, and we'll see how that is. Atticus won't teach them how to shoot. He says that's Uncle Jack's job. He was just given into the inedible, which is like they want rifles. Everybody in Macomb has a rifle. It's just one of those things that people grow up with. Francis, meanwhile, receives for Christmas knee pants, a leather back sack, 5 shirts, and a bow tie, which Scout says is nice. She's being ironic. Later, while playing or sort of fighting, Francis calls Atticus a nigger lover and says that Atticus is ruining the family. The exact quote here is, "I guess it ain't your fault if Uncle Atticus is a nigger lover besides, but I'm here to tell you that you certainly does mortify the rest of the family." Francis, what the hell do you mean? Just what I said. Grandma says it's bad enough he lets you run wild, but now he's turned out a nigger lover, will never be able to walk the streets of Macomb again. He's ruining the family. That's what he's doing. And so after a sort of a chase and a hide and go seek, Scout eventually catches up with Francis, maybe calls him a whore lady, and hits him smack in the face. Uncle Jack catches Scout and actually whips Scout. And it's not until after they leave Finch Landing, because as soon as Atticus finds out this fight, he says, "We stayed too long," and they leave, that Scout tells Uncle Jack that he's not being fair. And this is sort of like lesson number 8. If Uncle Jack's lesson about not using, cuss words unless you're extremely provoked, that's lesson 7. This is lesson 8. And what Scout says is, well, in the first place, you never stopped to give me a chance to tell you my side of it. Just lit right into me. When Jim and I fuss, Atticus doesn't ever just listen to Jim's side of it. He hears mine too. And in the second place, you told me never to use words like that except in extreme provocation. And Francis provoked me enough to knock his block off. And then, so Uncle Jack asks what he said, and Scout replies, he called Atticus a nigger lover. I ain't very sure what it means, but the way Francis said it, I'll tell you one thing right now, Uncle Jack. I swear before God, if I'll sit there and let him say something about Atticus. And Uncle Jack is extremely mad and asks, is going to actually go drive out back to Finch's Landing and take it out on Francis. Scout makes Uncle Jack promise not to say anything to Atticus and to let it go, and he does. And then she asks what a whore lady is, and Uncle Jack, of course, gives her a long story that has nothing to do with what a whore lady is. And then the chapter ends with Uncle Jack and Atticus having a discussion of the future events or what's going to happen with this court case. And this is mostly what Atticus says, and this is on page 100. What bothers me is that she and Jim will have to absorb some ugly things pretty soon. It couldn't be worse, Jack. The only thing we've got is a black man's word against the Yules. The evidence boils down to, you did, I didn't. The jury couldn't possibly be expected to take Tom Robinson's word against the Yules. Aren't you acquainted with the Yules? And then Uncle Jack talks about the Yules, and Atticus says, well, you're a generation off. And then he continues, and then Uncle Jack says, well, what are you going to do then? Before I'm through, I intend to jar the jury a bit. I think we have a reasonable chance on appeal, though. I can't really tell at this stage. Jack, I hope to get through life without a case of this kind. But John Taylor pointed at me and said, You're it. I hope and I pray I can get Jim and Scout through it without bitterness, and most of all, without catching Macomb's usual disease. And Macomb's usual disease is racism. And think about that. Keep the idea of usual disease and connect it to the next chapter, chapter 10, and the disease that you see in chapter 10. There is. We'll talk about it because it's a huge symbol, but it's also reinforced. I mean, people ask, how in the world does does that work? I just want you to pay attention to disease and link it when you read chapter 10. Think about it. And then Atticus knows that Scout's listening to their conversation, and he tells her to go to bed. He wants her to hear the conversation before he sends her to bed, because he wants her to think about what is going to happen in the near future. And so let's talk about some deeper things here. So Atticus on page 87 says, "This time we aren't fighting the Yankees. We're fighting our friends." Note, to contrast the unity of the previous chapter with the fire, you have this idea of civil war. And there's multiple reasons why civil war is the illusions are brought up so many times. One is to reinforce this idea of racism that comes out of slavery and Jim Crow laws. But the other is Macomb becomes a civil war. You have, the community divided. You have even the family divided. You have family members fighting family members. Francis fighting, Scout fighting Francis. The Cecil Jacobs fighting Scout. These things wouldn't happen until you have a civil war that's broken up by this idea of race. You also have the allusions to General Hood, and I talked about General Hood, and Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was killed in the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. Stonewall Jackson was the general who put so much fear into the Union Army. He won so many battles that it seemed that the Confederates might actually win the war in 1863. And then he's shot, and he's like the last hope for the South. And so when he dies, the hope for the Confederacy, seems to disappear. And this is one of the things that Cousin Ike Finch is talking about when he talks about, when Scout says, you sound like Cousin Ike Finch. This idea that you can continue to fight even though there's no hope. You also have an allusion to the Missouri Compromise, and this is on page 87, also connected with Ike Finch. The Missouri Compromise was the first compromise between North free states and South slave states to preserve the balance of power. So the slave states feared that if there were more free states and slave states, that eventually the free states would disallow slavery, would get rid of slavery. The North states, of course, feared that if there was more free slave states and free states, that you'd eventually have slavery, everywhere. And so that in 1820, they came to a compromise. Maine would enter the Union as a free state, and Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state. But beyond this, there was no other state could enter the Union as a slave state above Missouri's southern border. So really, this eliminated the rest of the Louisiana Purchase entering the Union as a slave state. Cousin Ike Finch talks about this as far as this is where all their problems started, was with the Missouri Compromise. They lost when they had to compromise with Missouri. So let's go into those are the allusions right there. General Hood, Stonewall Jackson, Missouri Compromise, and they all reinforces this idea of the theme of prejudice. You also have some major characters that are introduced in this chapter. You have Tom Robinson. Tom Robinson is going to be a big character coming up. Tom Robinson is the man who's been accused that Atticus has to defend. He is African American. We don't know what he's been accused of yet, but it is pretty bad. I mean, so bad that it has caused the town to to be riled up against Atticus for accepting the job, and it's Atticus's duty to defend him. You also have this idea that like no jury is going to accept a black man's word against a white man's word, and so we'll see how that works out. You also have Judge Taylor. Judge Taylor is a good guy. He appoints Atticus because he knows Atticus will do the duty of defending Tom Robinson, and Tom Robinson needs a good lawyer. Then you also have really Aunt Alexandra and Uncle Jack, and these characters are really introduced here in this chapter. Aunt Alexandra, according to Scout, is cold. She's married a man, Uncle Jimmy, that she doesn't even seem to like, and they somehow had a kid, and that kid eventually marries and produces Francis Hancock. Francis Hancock also, the Hancock is an illusion. Hancock is a person that struts around cocky, so, and Francis does that, in this chapter, like he struts around like he's privileged until Scout smacks him in the face. So she's married Uncle Jimmy. Uncle Jimmy's only said 4 words to Scout and Jim their entire life: get off that fence. So Uncle Jimmy's also pretty cold and distant, and he spends all his time in the hammock out in the backyard. Scout compares Aunt Alexandra to Mount Everest as far as like being able to understand her. She's like the peak of Mount Everest as far as understanding. Aunt Alexandra thinks that Scout needs to be more ladylike, to wear dresses. Scout says she can't do anything in a dress. Aunt Alexandra also believes that Atticus lets his children run wild. The irony here is that Atticus is probably a better father than Aunt Alexandra was a mother or a grandmother. Aunt Alexandra is also a symbol of Southern aristocracy. This idea of this privileged, noble, aristocratic South that lived in mansions and had slaves, and so she's a relic back to these old days of a Southern belle. She's also a daughter of the Confederacy, but deep down, Aunt Alexandra does care, and we'll see how that is. She's not a terrible person. She seems terrible, in this chapter, but she's just misdirected as far as how to express her concern over Atticus and what Atticus is doing, and what this case is going to do to his family, his children, because she knows that this is a case that he can't win, and it's a case that's going to cause a lot of problems for him and his children. And then we have Uncle Jack, an introduction to Uncle Jack. Uncle Jack is about the exact opposite of Aunt Alexandra. He is the youngest sibling. He's warm, and he likes to laugh and joke and play. He's a great storyteller, probably an awesome doctor. I mean, he takes a splinter out of Scout while telling a story, and Scout doesn't even know splinter's been removed. He's also a bachelor for life. He's never going to get married. He's never going to have children. He's also willing to learn from his mistakes. I mean, Scout teaches him a major lesson that he probably should have learned before his age, but he's never had children, so he's never really had to think about it. But he's willing to learn and admit that he's wrong to Atticus, which takes a very good person. I mean, a very deep person to really be able to do that. I mean, most people don't like to admit that they're wrong, or some people won't ever admit they're wrong. He also says he doesn't understand children, and he's a major ally to Atticus. He supports Atticus's and reinforces Atticus's positions. I mean, he's very positive with what is going on in the story. All right, so some lessons to take away from here again too. Don't swear unless you have you're extremely provoked. It could get you in trouble. Also, listen to both sides of the argument. In debate, we talk about this idea that you never really understand your own position until you understand the opposite, your opponent's position. So really, to understand a topic, you have to understand both sides of the topic. So you have to listen to both sides of an issue to come to a conclusion. And then you got the allusions. You got allusions to General Hood, Stonewall Jackson, Missouri Compromise, and you have these themes here. The meaning of duty. Atticus taking this case. He has to. It's his duty to take this case. Just like it's Uncle Jackson Alexander's duty to sort of protect the family, even though they don't come to it. They come to it in different directions. And it's Scout's duty to sort of keep her head in this mess that they're going to be thrown into. But really, the duty of a lawyer to defend his client is very big. Also, you have the nature of prejudice, racism in this chapter. This is a civil war. Racism is going to may come down, and the family down into opposing sides, uh, and that's really what part two is going to be about. So there's two more chapters in part one. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. I hope this helps.